Episode 14 with Sir Ulrich hosts Money Matters. Now, you've probably heard back in your comic book reading days, with great power comes great responsibility. Bitcoin provides you great power, but what about the responsibility part? Well, it's up to us to create an environment where we are actually sovereign over not only our money, but how we transact it, how we receive it, send it, um, but how we compute in our lives in general. Today with me is Matt Hill. Matt Hill is the CEO of Start9, and he helps us go down that path of individual sovereignty, especially with computing. Matt, how are you today?
Doing great, Ulrich. Thanks for having me on.
Right on. So Start9, I can summarize, builds as you have said before, builds a general purpose operating system that enables a computer literate person to essentially run a personal server and install any software that can enable people to exclude trusted third parties from their life. Did I miss anything there?
You didn't miss anything. The general purpose could be misinterpreted to mean that this computer OS, the operating system that we make, could replace, say, your client operating system like Windows. It's not. What we develop is a server OS. It is a operating system that is specifically designed to administer a server as opposed to a client like a phone or a laptop. Our operating system gives you the ability to administer a server. Within that, it's general purpose, meaning you can now use this operating system to install any software under the sun. So it's special purpose at the highest level, as in it's specially designed to run a server, but it's general purpose in that it can run anything on that server.
Now, that reminds me of a question. And for those in the audience who haven't heard much from Matt Hill, you guys could go to the Start9 website, and there are many different interviews. He interviewed with Simply Bitcoin a couple weeks ago. Back in December, he went to the Denver BitDevs meetup, and it was an hour and a half of very comprehensive, very eye-opening stuff. Go check that out. We're going to review some of the things he talked about today. But there was one question I heard, I forgot where, probably the Denver BitDevs, talking about a server being stationary and a client kind of being mobile. Would you go into the rationale for why a server should be in one place and a client has the capability to be anywhere and everywhere?
Absolutely. And there's a broader question here, which is kind of what is the difference between a client and a server? But in terms of mobility, you want a server to be stationary because stationary means stability. You never want your server to be offline. So it should be in a secure location with a reliable power supply, hopefully also connected to a backup power supply, though very few people do that. So if the power goes out, the server can stay on for an hour or so before it goes out as well. And you need to have a reliable, stable internet connection, which means being connected over Ethernet. And hopefully your ISP does a good job of keeping the internet on. So you want your server stationary because you want your server accessible, reliable, and stable. And when you move things around, they need to be unplugged. They go offline. They lose and gain internet connections, and so it's not going to be a very good server if those things are happening.
Right. And I mean, and when you think about your product, I mean, even if the internet goes out, all of a sudden, the things that your product supports, like Bitcoin Core, it loses track with the time chain, and so it becomes less useful if it goes in and out. If, like you say, the ISP has a low reliability or availability metric, any kind of things that happen where you lose track, you want that availability to be as high as possible all the time, correct?
Absolutely. And not just for the services that are connecting over peer-to-peer networks like Bitcoin. You might be running something on your server that you and you alone are using, like a file server. So you're on the other side of the world, you take a picture, you want that picture to be sent to your server so that it can be stored there. Well, if the server's offline, then that's not going to work very well. So You want your server to be stationary in a place that is reliable and accessible. And clients, by contrast, are computers that you take with you. And anything from a cell phone to a laptop to a watch are devices that move around and that you generally want to be syncing together, right? The server not only serves the function of storing data to be accessed by multiple clients, but it also provides the interconnectivity. It provides the networking for those clients to connect. So servers are where data is processed and stored and synced. Servers are the hub and clients are the spokes. That's the best kind of visual to understand the difference between clients and servers. Servers are these hubs that sit at the middle of the room, and all the clients are connecting to the server so that they can have the same information.
Right. Hub spoke relationship. Yeah, that takes me back to my software engineering classes in college. Oh my gosh. Okay. So let me talk about let's talk about Start9 and its relationship with nodes, Bitcoin nodes, Lightning nodes. Start9 isn't just a plug and play Bitcoin node product. It offers a lot more. Perhaps you can describe the relationship between your product with the software services that is running a node, and Bitcoin and Lightning. And maybe while you're talking about that, go down another rabbit hole and talk about the differences between running a Bitcoin node and a Lightning node.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I'll address the first one first, and then sort of dive into Bitcoin and Lightning more specifically. So you can think about Bitcoin and Lightning as services, applications. These are programs that run on a computer. They need a computer to run on, and a computer needs an operating system. So in order to run a Bitcoin node, there's two layers beneath it. I mean, there's more, but we can roughly divide it into two layers. You need hardware, you need a physical computer, and you need an operating system. There's also firmware, but you need a computer and then an operating system. And then on top of the operating system, you can install Bitcoin. This is unavoidable. There's no way to run a Bitcoin node aside from what I just described. People will say, well, I can run a Bitcoin node in the cloud. Well, the cloud is just a computer and an operating system located somewhere else. So what we do as a team is we develop the operating system. We develop that middle layer because that was the layer that was missing, not just in Bitcoin, but in all of computing, all of self-hosted computing. There's plentiful hardware in the world. Computers are cheap, available, maybe not the latest and greatest ones, but there's an abundance of old hardware laying around that is plenty powerful to service the needs of many people for many use cases. And there's lots of applications and services and, node software in the open source world. So you have Bitcoin, you have Lightning, you have Nextcloud, you have Bitwarden, the list, there's thousands and thousands of open source software teams and projects in the world that are writing code and software and providing it for free. And it's largely unused. Instead, people are using things like, Dropbox and WhatsApp and Slack and iCloud. And these are not free and open source software. These are proprietary software being run on somebody else's server, and everyone's just using it. And the reason for that is because there was no operating system that enabled me, right, or you, or just any non-technical, but basically computer literate person to discover, install, and effectively run their own private alternative to those companies and services I just listed, right? To be their own file storage, private cloud, to be their own messaging platform for talking to friends and family, and essentially to not use these third parties. In order to do that, you had to be pretty technical. You had to not only be technical, but have time on your hands and patience, because discovering, installing, and running open source software on your own server is a challenging endeavor, time-consuming and challenging endeavor. And that is because there was no operating system in existence that made it easy. Right? Mac OS and Windows are optimized for you to run a laptop or a desktop. iOS and Android are optimized for you to run a mobile device like a phone or tablet. The operating system that everyone turns to when it comes to running a server is Linux, some flavor of Linux or another, all of which, until us, required you to use the command line. Linux operating systems are not meant to be used through a graphical interface, at least not for the server side of things. Yes, there are desktop Linux flavors like Ubuntu, where you can install it onto a laptop or desktop and have a GUI, but that GUI is for the client. If you want to use that device as a server, you have to go under the GUI, get on the command line, whip out your sysadmin, I have infinite hours and patience hat, and go to work. And nobody does that, of course. And that technical challenge and the fact that nobody takes it up for understandable reasons has resulted in the computing paradigm that we have on Earth today, which is called cloud computing, which basically means we're all using remote controls that are renting space on somebody else's computer, namely Apple's computer and Google's computer. And so what we did was we set out to lower the effort necessary to own and operate a personal server by doing what those who came before us did, which is by designing a point-and-click graphical operating system for a particular type of computer. So in the 1970s and 80s, Apple and Microsoft, some others, but those were the two dominant ones, invented graphical interfaces that are now Windows and Mac OS that unleashed the personal computing revolution. It made it possible for everyone, even children, to own and operate a computer. And they did that through the advent of the graphical operating system. Then in the late 2000s, you had iOS and then Android come along. And these are operating systems optimized for the administration of a mobile device. And that unleashed the mobile revolution. Right now, everything's mobile. And now we have this third revolution, which is a graphical interface for a server, such that now anyone, even a child, will be able to own and operate a server. And with these three pieces in place, the client operating systems for desktops and mobile, and the server operating system, it is possible for a person to now take total control over their computing life, because aside from laptops, desktops, mobile devices, and servers, that pretty much covers computers, with the exception of like IoT devices. And those are a different category because they won't have their own operating system. Those will all be administered through a server OS serving a website. And we can get into that a little bit later maybe. But so that's what we do, is we build Start OS. We call it Start OS, which empowers you or anyone to own and operate a server and opt out of third-party intermediaries in your digital life.
Right on. So like there are a couple things I wanted to go into. Now, I do want to talk about the differences between Bitcoin and a Lightning node, but you mentioned cloud computing, which of course would come up when you talk about the evolution of computing in general. Obviously, you're building these localized or these personal servers that are easy to use for computer literate people. But why, when someone is just coming across this interview, what's the intrinsic issue with cloud computing as we know it today, where you're essentially a client to a centralized a centralized layer like Apple, Google, Microsoft? Go into the dangers of that iteration of cloud computing.
Sure. So your devices, your laptop, your cell phone, your tablet, whatever, it is very acceptable to think about them as remote controls. These are not where the data is being processed and saved and transmitted. Um, these devices are remote controls that are remotely operating a device where the data is being processed, saved, and transmitted. And we call that a server. And so currently, when you open up your cell phone and you download an app and you enter your username and password, your cell phone is reaching out to a server that is not yours, that belongs to somebody else, and is asking to use it temporarily. It's basically saying, hey, I'd like to use your computer to process and store some data, to retrieve my information and then send messages to my family or whatever. And when you do that, you are leaving your area and you're going to somebody else's area. This is like entering somebody else's home. Their rules apply. You are not in charge of that place. So when you use somebody else's server, you have to agree to their terms, right? And normally this is presented as like a privacy policy and a terms and conditions statement, which of course are a million pages long and nobody reads. But ultimately, you're just saying like, okay, yeah, I get to use your computer and I have to agree to all this stuff. So there's 4 problems with this, right? Because the first thing that should jump to your mind when I say something like this is like, oh, I'm not independent here. I'm asking somebody else to do something for me. I'm essentially saying, I can't do something. Please help. WhatsApp. I would like to send a message to my mom. Hey, WhatsApp, can you help me do this? You're asking for help. And when you're on that side of the equation, you're going to pay for it, right? Like you are now a paying customer of sorts, which is a fine thing in general, but you need to understand the trade-offs and the nature of this relationship. When
You
you
need to
use some,
understand what you're paying, essentially.
yes, what you're paying and what the risks are,
Yeah.
right? Um, when you rely on other people, you are exposing yourself. And I don't think people realize how much they are exposing themselves when it comes to the digital realm. And part of the reason for that is because it's invisible. It's not as readily observable as the physical realm. But when you use somebody else's server for your computing needs, which you do for everything, pretty much every app on your laptop, every app on your phone is just remotely controlling somebody else's computer, you are granting them an enormous power over you. And it manifests in 4 ways. There are 4 problems with this relationship, or 4 potential problems. One is invasion of privacy. When you are remotely controlling their server, they see every button you push on the remote control, every message you send, every file you save, everything flows through their server and is stored forever and analyzed and potentially sold, and in most cases is sold, so that they can profit off of your computing activities, your information, your data. And this is a problem, and most people recognize this as a problem these days, and it's becoming increasingly unacceptable to people, which is a nice trend. Number 2 is censorship. When you use somebody else's computer for your needs, they can tell you to stop. It's not yours. And so if you violate their terms and conditions, they will just kick you off. But they could also censor you in more subtle ways on like social media platforms, for instance, when everyone is using X servers to share information, X decides what gets seen and what doesn't get seen. And they get to make that decision rightfully because it's their house. It's like having everyone over to your house to discuss politics, but you get to choose which rooms everybody is in. You get to choose whose microphone is on. You are leading the discussion because it's in your house. It's your house, your rules. But when you go to X, it's their house, their rules. And so I'm not even complaining about censorship being like X is censoring. They have every right to censor. It's their house. So if you don't like it, you need to stop going to their house and you need to go to a public commons instead, somewhere that is public ground, and we can get into more what the options are there. But that's number 2 is censorship. Number 3 is cost, outright cost, not paying with data, but paying with dollars or whatever your national currency is, or paying with Bitcoin if they are willing to accept it. But you got to pay because these people are providing a service. The people who are running these servers and allowing you to use them to persist and process data are providing a service for you, and you need to pay them. And so if they're not charging you a subscription fee, they are monetizing you and your data. They have to be, otherwise they'd be out of business. So you are paying one way or another. And in most cases, you're paying in both ways. You're paying a subscription fee and they're mining your data, selling it. So it's strictly expensive, more expensive than a direct relationship, right? They are intermediaries, brokers. When you introduce a broker to any transaction, they get a cut. And so it becomes more expensive. So this is strictly less economically efficient than a direct relationship between buyer and seller or between two transacting parties. These people are sitting between you and the people you're trying to interact with, or the process you're trying to complete. And lastly is that when everyone uses intermediaries, namely the same intermediaries, so when everyone is using iCloud for their computing needs, then iCloud becomes a valuable target for attackers, hackers. Nobody wants to hack you. Your information alone is not valuable enough to justify the effort and risk of the attack. People are not going to risk life and liberty to attack you as an individual to get your photos and data, unless you are a very prominent person and there's leverage beneath this attack. But the average person does not need to worry about being the victim of a hacker because you're not worth attacking, right? It's vanity and arrogance to believe that somebody wants to attack you. They don't. You don't matter. But iCloud matters. And if your data is on iCloud, then you are a civilian collateral damage and victim of a war, an attack that had nothing to do with you, really. So anyway, those are the 4 problems with cloud computing. You have invasion of privacy, censorship, cost, and custodial risk. And all of these are getting worse. It's not like one is leading the charge. They're all getting worse at pretty much the same insane rate. And year over year, people are really starting to understand the dangers and costs of this model of computing that dominates Earth. This is like how humans use computers is in the model that I just described. So we don't think it's sustainable. We don't think that that is the model that humanity deserves or will receive. And we think there's a better model, and that's the one we're helping to develop.
Right on. And of course, it's getting worse because of so many different dynamics that's happening in our world. Where it comes to cost, inflation, the value of the dollar or the value of your unit of exchange is less than it was before. Censorship and invasion of privacy. As computing power gets evolves, grows, these owners of these servers, owners of these platforms realize that they can do more, extract more out of you for their stakeholders or for themselves. And then single point of attack, I mean, as these technologies, as computing evolves, so do the people who use it for nefarious reasons. And so single point of attack, the hackers get better, the hackers get stronger. You hope that your cybersecurity grows as well, but that's kind of an incremental gain. So we run into these problems, but one problem that I think the general audience likes to talk about a lot is censorship. And you mentioned a very good point that I try to explain to other people. They treat X, Twitter, Facebook like a public platform, as if everyone has a right to say whatever they want on those platforms. And it's like, and you really hit the nail on the head where it's like Twitter's house, Twitter's rules. Jack Dorsey runs Twitter, or their board of directors, whomever you believe was the reason for their censorship. Um, they're the ones who get to say what gets said and not, and what doesn't get said. Same thing with Elon right now. People complain all the time about certain things that are censored there, while other people are saying, "Hey, this is the best thing that's ever happened." It's because the rules changed. So my question to you is, why do you think, and this is now we're going to the esoteric philosophical thing, why do you think people have gone down that path to thinking that that someone else's stuff is theirs? And even another example with money, people say that, a lot of people want to defend cash, and it's like, this is our right, we're going to defend, we're going to keep our cash society and not go cashless. But the cash doesn't belong to them. It belongs to the central bank that printed it. And if they want to take it away, they're going to, by one way or another. How did people get into this way of thinking that things that aren't theirs, all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, that's mine? Where does that come from?
Boy, it's
I'm sorry.
very, it's just, it's big. Where does it come from is, people can observe the state of a thing, but discussing how it came about is often indirect, and so can be tough to figure out. I think about this a lot, not only because I build alternatives or solutions for people to exist independently of things and actually own property, digital, property. But because I'm just interested. This is, I'm fascinated by the world as it exists and how it could be better and how it got to where it is. So to answer you, ultimately we have a very uneducated populace. The school systems are not designed to create free thinking, liberty loving humans. The school systems are designed to create compliant citizens. And so the baseline answer to why people think that, why people put pressure on politicians, on their government, to put pressure on X to uphold the rights of the First Amendment, is a product of miseducation, right? Like, yeah, it is a product of a misunderstanding of the principles of property rights and human liberty in general. And worse, it exacerbates the problem because it ignores or misunderstands the nature of how X got into such a powerful position in the first place. So when you talked about Jack Dorsey and the board or whoever was doing the censorship during the 2020 stuff, and then all the stuff through COVID and all that, right? This, like, when censorship really became prominent for a few years there, that may have been, and we have some evidence to believe that was internal policies at Twitter to an extent, but we also have evidence to suggest that Twitter was being coerced by authorities, by the government, to amplify and de-amplify certain messages. And so the point of that last observation is that if your business or you as an individual have political power, if you have influence in society, in a democratic society, you can and will be forced at gunpoint, if necessary, to do the bidding of the government. You must be, right? If you have sufficient influence over the population that you can sway votes in one direction or another, somebody is going to show up at your door and either bribe you, which is the positive ending for you at least, right? You sell out and take yours and screw everyone else. Not good for everyone else. Might end well for you, not your soul, but your pocketbook.
Right.
If that doesn't work, they're going to blackmail you. If that doesn't work, they're going to threaten you and your family. And if they don't do these things, they're actually not playing the game well. They're going to lose. Their opponents are going to do it. Because it doesn't matter whether steroids are legal or not. If your opponents are taking them and you're not, you're just going to lose. And so that's what happens when you empower government. When you give a single group of people, a system or an institution, a monopoly of force and a moral authority to utilize that force, they must utilize that force granted to them by the people to influence or coerce anyone with political power to support their cause. And so to fix this, you have to do two things. You have to give people a way to opt out. Number one is, no matter how rotten a system gets, if there is a way for you to opt out of that system, then it's like, okay, at least there's that, right? We might not be able to fix the system, might not be able to, fundamentally fix human society. And that might be a broad philosophic statement, by the way. I'm not sure that you can ever fully fix human society. We almost are diseased in a way that we're going to continually build rotten institutions if given enough time. And that might be part of nature's process, that things sort of grow and then they rot, right?
And clean up and recycle. And
Correct.
yeah, and we
But
build something anew.
Exactly. But what is necessary is that during the rotting process and that in the lead up to the rebuilding of a better system, people have the ability to get on lifeboats, to get out, to avoid suffering and death, right? These lifeboats are essential. If the ship is bound to sink, then you should be building lifeboats and you should be getting on them as best you can and encouraging your friends and family to get on them. If the ship is going down, you should get off the ship until a new one can be constructed, which in fact is being constructed in parallel, right? The new system is being constructed as the old system is coming down. And again, this is part of nature's process. This is inherent in the flow of reality and existence, is that things die while other things grow. But you have to be able to transition from one to the other. Otherwise, you end up with tragedy. You end up with suffering and death that could have been avoided through a little bit of prudent planning. And so, challenge one is build lifeboats, give people the ability to opt out of the war zone and the sinking ship and protect themselves and their families. Number two is build the new system so that those people who are on these lifeboats can gradually, if they so choose, rejoin society. And in fact, what we think we've discovered, we being the broader cypherpunk, anarchist, libertarian, slap whatever titles you want on it movement, people who are fundamentally for individual rights and human liberty, are doing, what we think we've stumbled upon, is that the lifeboats, that you can actually construct society from just a massive collection of lifeboats, that we don't have to repeat history in the sense of, well, okay, there's a war, the old system is falling apart, monarchy or feudalism is dying, then monarchy is dying, whatever. Like, you have a dying political system, and people who are way out in the rural areas are fine because they're like kind of, they've opted out. They're growing their own food. They're raising their own children. They're, defending their own land. Like, these people are independent humans and they don't suffer from the fall, but then they ultimately get absorbed into the next giant ship that's getting constructed. And so But we think that with the advent of advanced technology, communications technology in particular, like the internet, that you actually can just, you don't need to build a giant ship anymore. People can just live independently, totally independently, and in perpetuity, and choose to form organizations on a voluntary basis at a small scale. So it's like, rural farming, independent kind of Western, the old West America type of vibe, meets the like futuristic, hyper efficient society where you're never having to sacrifice your individual rights to participate in society, where you are an independent being that can do whatever you want at any time. But you are not disconnected. You didn't have to go move to the woods and live in a cave to do it. You can remain part of society.
I gotta stop you right there.
Yeah.
You're getting to have too many like, wow, I want to talk about that. Wow, I want to talk about that.
Well, you asked a big question.
Oh my gosh, I knew,
And big
and
questions
I'm getting,
always spawn more questions. So
and I'm like, I gotta get to a couple of them.
right.
And one, I wanted to talk about an analogy that you talked about. Man, it's like that one. I knew I was going to get some good stuff from you. First of all, voluntarism.
Yeah.
When you talk about the lifeboats, when you mention the lifeboats, I'm like, what if that lifeboat is sustainable enough and can communicate with, and right as I said, like communicate with other lifeboats. You said that, and that's essentially coloring what decentralization is.
Yes.
And we can see as the Titanic is going down, whether we have this democracy Titanic or central big government, and you have all these big powerful countries and EUs all over the place. And now as that stuff is like, hey, this isn't working, but oh, over there yonder, I see what I think is a another big ship that I can hop onto. It's really a bunch of lifeboats, and that other parallel system is Bitcoin being built right now. Bitcoin and what you provide in these, basically this, like you said, this Western, this this hyper advanced Westernism, Old West frontierism, if you will.
Yep.
And Bitcoin, and you know what? Before we even go down to anything else, I forgot, like Bitcoin. It's like, this is the Bitcoin show. And it's like, we haven't even talked about the
This is all
Bitcoin
about
node.
Bitcoin.
It
Yeah.
is, yeah. And I really do want to take a segue before I forget, because I want to talk about these things. The Bitcoin node, the Lightning node. A lot of people are confused by those things. What's the difference?
Yep.
What are the strengths and weaknesses? If you can go into that real quick, and
Yeah.
kind of summarize those services on your platform, and what are the pluses and minuses, what are the needs and nice to haves.
Yeah. Bitcoin has been a wonderfully catalyzing and welcome, event for sovereign computing, because for the first time, people are wanting to run a server, and they don't even realize they're wanting to run a server. What they say is, I want to run a node. I want to run a Bitcoin node. And what they discover, hopefully, is that to run a Bitcoin node, you have to run a server. Running a Bitcoin node implies running a server. Even if you're running your Bitcoin node on your laptop is in that moment functioning as a server. It's also a client for other purposes, but it's functioning as a server for the purposes of Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has brought broad popular awareness to the whole concept and existence of these things called servers. A lot of people have heard the word server, but they really have no concept of what it is or what role it plays in the computing paradigm. And Bitcoin, like many things, has shined a light on a previously dark area of the world and its computing infrastructure, namely the nature of servers. And so that was a prerequisite. Now, what can you do on your server? You can do all sorts of stuff. Let me focus on Bitcoin and Lightning for a second. On your server, you can run a Bitcoin node. A Bitcoin node is your access point, your access point and presence on the Bitcoin network. When you are storing some funds in a wallet, you have no presence on the Bitcoin network. Those funds are not on the network. They are represented by a UTXO. There is a transaction somewhere in a block somewhere that demonstrated the encumbrance of funds to a particular address, but you are not actually on the network. You can think about the Bitcoin network as like a marketplace, And you can be home with some goods or some money that in theory would be useful at the marketplace. Like you could go there and sell some goods, or you could go there and buy some goods. But until you go to the marketplace, you're not actually at the marketplace. You're not part of the market until you've gone to the marketplace. And the way that you do that in Bitcoin is through a node. A node is the gateway and booth presence in the network, in the Bitcoin network. So if you ever want to receive money from somebody, money being Bitcoin, if you ever want to receive Bitcoin from somebody, or you ever want to send Bitcoin to somebody, it must arrive through and be sent from a node. There's no way around that. There is no way to participate in the Bitcoin network except through a node. And so if you are not running a node yourself, you are using somebody else's node. Inherently, those are the only two options. You're either using your own node to access the network, or you're using somebody else's node. And when you use somebody else's node, just like when you use somebody else's server for any other purpose, it's their node, their rules. You are outsourcing your vote for the rules to this person. And you are giving up all the other things that you give up when you use somebody else's server for any other purpose. Privacy. When you send a transaction through somebody else's node, they know about it. They definitely know about it. They know who you are. They know how much money you're sending. Now, there's some privacy features in Bitcoin that help obfuscate some of these things, but ultimately you are giving up some degree of privacy when you use somebody else's node to send or receive funds from the Bitcoin network. Number two is censorship. They can just say, no, I will not send your transaction. I will not send your transaction to the network because you're a banned person. You're not a good person. And so I'm not going to allow you to do this. Now, could you find another node that will let you? Sure. But what if they're all banning you? What if node operators are coerced into implementing blacklists, IP blacklists, and now you can't, any transaction originating from a United States IP is not allowed to go onto the Bitcoin network? Would it work long term? No, but would it disrupt things? Absolutely. So censorship is equally prominent or possible on the Bitcoin network as it is in any other area of our lives. Cost. Nobody's charging right now. Most people offer their nodes up for free, but in theory, you could imagine a future where there are not many nodes being run, or that the nodes are, behind paywalls, and that it actually costs you money, but beyond the network fee. By the way, this is not the Bitcoin network fee that people could just charge to receive your transaction broadcast. We're already seeing it with some entities like mempool.space, for instance, has a option for if the fees on the network are too expensive, or you have a transaction that's stuck and you need to accelerate it, like you really need a transaction to get mined right away, you can actually pay mempool, the company, and they have direct relationships with miners, and they will literally hand the transaction to a miner, which is also a node. It's just a miner node. Miner, not small, but miner as in MINER, a miner node.
Yep.
They could hand it to them directly to then be placed into a block, and they charge a fee for this. So you are already seeing the emergence of business models around
Is that a
getting
subscription? Is that a
No,
subscription, or is that's just a pay per transaction kind of thing?
pay to play, pay as you go. You can just
Interesting. Yep, yep,
you can
yep.
just pay mempool money, and they will take your transaction and hand it to a miner, and it'll get into a block, and they guarantee it.
Mhm.
But again, they're charging for that. And if you're a bad person, they could just say no. So I say bad person always in quotes. It's always ironic, right? Like it's somebody has labeled you a bad person. So anyway, that's so you're using their node. So we recommend running your own node, and now you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. Your access to the network is private. It is guaranteed. Nobody can censor you. It's free forever. And all you have to do is run a server and install Bitcoin on it. And in the past, that's been a bit big, like, oh, well, how do I do that? I'd rather just pay, or I'd rather take my chances with privacy and censorship. No, it's super easy. It's very, very easy. We made it easy, and we recommend that everyone do it. It's just a way to fortify your own existence in the Bitcoin network. Now, a Lightning node is even more important to run yourself than a Bitcoin node, because at least the Bitcoin node is not storing funds on it. The Bitcoin node is just the gateway The funds are actually stored on the wallet, on the client wallet, on your phone or on a hardware wallet. And then you're moving those funds onto the Bitcoin network through a node. With Lightning, that's not the case. With Lightning, the funds are on the node. The money is stored on the server inherently.
So a quick question before you go on so I can get this one out. Does that make Lightning custodial?
No. Well, it can be. It depends on if you're running your own node or not, and that's where this is
Mhm,
going. Is
mhm.
it's you can run your own Lightning node, which means the funds are in your possession and your access to the network is guaranteed. So you get sort of 2 for 1 with running a Lightning node. You get self-custody of the funds, and you get guaranteed private access, guaranteed private free access to the network when you run your own node. If you're not running your own Lightning node, not only are you giving up privacy, introducing the possibility of censorship, introducing additional fees, but you are also literally giving custody of the funds to whoever is running the node. So there's a new kind of pattern or strategy that we've seen emerge over the last couple of years in Lightning, which is non-custodial, but still intermediated. And the way that this comes about is that your client device, like your phone, runs a light node. It actually runs a node on the phone, but it's not a full node. It's not fully capable of connecting to the network independently. It connects through a sort of larger node, which acts as your um, helper, right? Your kind of assistant in getting you connected to the network. We call these Lightning Service Providers, LSPs. Um, and so they do not have custody of your money. The money is on your phone, but you are relying on them to send and receive funds, similarly to using a Bitcoin node that belongs to somebody else. And so they can see all your transactions, which on Lightning is uh, worse in a sense because um, the network is intended to be very private. It even has onion routing associated with it, right? The transactions are actually wrapped in other transactions to obfuscate the origin and destination of a given payment. And when you use an LSP, you are very much betraying at least the origin of the payment. They know you're paying someone for something. Um, they can censor you pretty trivially. That's a flip of a switch, and all your money would be stuck on your phone. So it's like, wait, yay, I got a bunch of, Bitcoin tied up in a channel, in a Lightning channel on my phone, but my LSP just sort of cut me off. And so the process of getting those funds back, like it can be done, could be very painful. It could be weeks before you receive the funds back. And then you would receive them back to the on-chain address. And then you would have to so it could pose a huge hassle, a disruption to your financial life. It's like your bank account cutting you off. You still get the money, but you have to go open another bank account. You have to it would disrupt your life to be cut off from your bank.
I feel like this. I I've had a Breeze wallet. I use Breeze on occasion, but I'm not transacting in Lightning all the time. I feel like I've had a situation where I had a couple 100,000 sats. Not too much from a dollar value perspective, but didn't transact for 60 and 90 days, and I couldn't access my funds for a while. And I think just by me logging on to Breeze, I believe that it triggered something where it woke it back up per se, but it took a couple hours.
I mean,
Does that
that
sound
could just
familiar?
be that the Lightning network is insanely infantile right now. It's really
Yeah,
early. It doesn't work that well. We go to conferences and we sell stuff and we buy stuff with Lightning. We're like, oh, it's amazing. It really works. We're, it when you talk about broad adoption by the entire human race and stuff like that, it's not even close.
it's not ready, right?
No, it sucks in a way, right? The underlying software and the network and all that, it's still very young. And it won't be the only solution. It will not be the only layer 2 solution. People will transact with Bitcoin using Lightning, using Liquid, using Arc, using on-chain, using envelopes, right? Like getting Bitcoin from one person to another, there's many different avenues for that. And right now, the primary way that people do it is on-chain transactions. And the secondary way that people do it is the Lightning Network. But we are going to see a proliferation of options over the years. And I think the Lightning Network has a prominent role to play in the future of Bitcoin, but it will not be the only way for people to transact. But if you want to do Lightning and you want to do it in a sovereign way, the right way, where you and you alone control the money and control the ability to send and receive money privately on the Lightning Network, you need to run your own node. It's the only way to gain full independence, financial independence on the Lightning Network is to run a node. If you are not running a node, you are giving up some degree of privacy, risk of censorship, cost. Yeah.
These yeah, and not single point of attack. So we do grow a little bit, but there's still so many ways that we are losing our sovereignty by doing what sounds right, what sounds like, oh wow, we're advancing, we're using Lightning, we're using Bitcoin. But if we're not taking these practices in, if we're not bringing these practices into play, it's a marginal gain. Now this world that we're describing, where people are taking ownership of not only their money but their ability to transact the money, but not only the ability to transact the money, but the ability to send and receive information. We talked about the lifeboats, the self-reliant lifeboats that communicate with one another in a mesh network type of way, rather than hub spoke, where you have this big Titanic and all of these participants on the Titanic. That gets into, from the sovereign individual, if there's one big concept, is that the processor took power from centralized authorities. It was able to do things that we relied on a big, strong, efficient government to do. You can think about a mail carrier service. Well, now you can go peer to peer. You don't need the Pony Express owned by the government anymore. But there are a lot more other things that you don't need because of Bitcoin, because of personal servers. Does this impact the way we are governed going forward in the future? And what does that look like? Does that mean democracy and that primary form of governance has its days numbered? What type of government is in lieu of or in parallel of this Bitcoin standard that we're marching towards?
Yeah, another big question.
I knew I'd get you there.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic. Just the history of, evolution of governing models on Earth and human civilization. I don't think that democracy, I don't like that word, because we've never had a democracy. We've never wanted a democracy. That was never, we're talking about a democratic republic where people vote for other people to govern. That is what we colloquially refer to as democracy, but it's not actually democracy, right? That is a republic that is supposed to be checked by a constitution, such that the elected officials have limited powers. That's what we had ish. And that's what we're supposed to have, but the ish has gotten bigger over the years. We have less and less of that in practice, mostly because the power is unchecked by the Constitution, right? So in my mind, there's nothing wrong. And I don't think this is a dying concept at all. I think it will persist, of the democratic process, essentially of humans voting for other humans to perform roles in society. I don't think that there's a problem with that. The problem currently is that the elected officials, the people we vote for, are unchecked, that their power is essentially limitless, right? Growing and growing and growing. And this leads to tyranny. So what checks their power? Ultimately, it's the populace. Ultimately, the populace is the final check against runaway power of even a democratically elected government, right? Most tyrants are elected. Stalin was elected. Hitler was elected. Our current people are elected. Like, so democracy does not mean freedom. And it's a clever job that they do at equating those two words. But democracy is just a mechanism, right? The democratic process is a mechanism for arriving at leadership. And I think it's fine. In theory, there's nothing wrong with it. So what we're doing is we're actually just changing the power dynamics, where technology changes power dynamics. When a new technology is invented, it affords levers on power, right? So let's say, for instance, that a new technology, I'll take it to the extreme. Let's say, for instance, that a new technology was invented that gave every individual a physical force field around their body that was impregnable by anything. Like, the defensive force field could not be penetrated by any amount of government force. The entire army could show up at your house and nobody can get into the force field. How does that change society? Right? You can imagine that it would. I can't imagine exactly what would happen as a result of a technology like that.
I gotta cut you off real quick. Don't lose your spot, but it's almost
Yeah,
like the movies Dune, the Dune movies where they had those
yeah,
force fields, and anything fast moving would essentially get slowed up to the point where you could pick it off of you.
true.
And they had to change to these vibroblade type of weapons in
Yeah,
order to actually assault people.
yeah.
So
I mean, this
guns became depowered.
correct. Yeah, technology is the driving force behind the shape of governance and society, right? It is the prime mover, is the technology of the day. And in fact, you can do thought experiments and say, if there existed a certain technology, what kind of government would result? It requires an understanding of human psychology, sociology, technology, government, but you could make some pretty, accurate predictions, I think, at what type of governance model and society would emerge given a state of technology, and the accessibility and affordability of that technology as well. Because technology that is inaccessible and only available to a select few affords massive leverage on power, like atomic power, for instance, where a few people control atomic power led to a massive lopsided power dynamics on Earth. And we see that same kind of dynamics between individuals and their own government. And so what's happening right now is we are inventing technology that enables individuals to rely less on third parties, including government, for the fulfillment of their basic needs, digital needs in particular, at least in what I work on. And this changes the power dynamic between individuals and governments. While it might not be a physical force field that makes you, invincible against attack, it is a cloaking device that makes you exist outside their view, which is power. We're talking about an actual defensive position here. So, and it gets into concepts of revolution, and it gets into, war and battle strategies. And so while we view ourselves as technologists inventing wholesome, good technology that is readily available to individuals to get on a lifeboat and avoid being sunk with the rest of the ship, we also are aware that the previous owners and captains of the ship don't want people to leave. And they want to pretend like everything is fine, and they want everyone to go down with them. And they might even be delusional enough to think that it's not going down until it's underwater. And they will try to use force, whatever force is available to them, to prevent you from getting on a lifeboat and to prevent everyone from leaving, because that guarantees the ship will sink. The only hope they have is keeping you there, keeping you working, right? But more and more people are wanting to jump. And so ultimately what we're talking about here is push comes to shove, right? We can talk in lighthearted terms about it all day of like, oh yeah, we're just building a lifeboat. That's good and wholesome and people want to get on it. But let's be real. What happens when they try to stop you? What happens when they try to go fetch you? You're already on the lifeboat and you're out there and they try to reel you back in. What are you going to do? Do you have the ability to defend yourself or not? So ultimately, we're talking about brute force power here. And we believe that the nature of decentralized technology affords individuals and families a greater degree of defensive positioning and power than they've ever had. So we often are referred to, and I've said this as well, we're sort of the digital 2A, right? It's like the right to bear arms is a very important check on runaway government power, because a disarmed populace has no defense against tyranny. But an armed populace, government's going to think twice before they try to put everyone in rail cars. They're going to think twice, come into your house because maybe you're armed. It's very important. It's a very important check on tyranny. But so is the digital defensive positioning, because if your life can be turned off with the flip of a switch, if you are so dependent on Google and your bank and Apple for your life, if all that just turned off, what if your iCloud account went away? What if your bank account went away? What if your internet turned off? Like, how would you be? Would you survive? Would you suffer? If the answer is yes, you would suffer, then it can and will be used against you to reel you back into the ship. You will not be able to get off the ship. They will hold you here against your will if you can be. So, and not just you as an individual, but the resistance, more broadly speaking, the more people who are armed, both physically and digitally, the greater the chance that we're going to get off of this thing and build the next system peacefully before the ship sinks and everyone suffers. Because you are less likely to be attacked when you are well armed. It's sort of a counterintuitive statement. It's that if you are disarmed, you can almost guarantee violence. If you are armed, violence is less likely. It's like more guns, more better, and more. The more people who are independent in the digital realm, the better, because you're a formidable enemy. You're not going to be attacked. Nobody wants to attack someone if they're going to get whipped. So anyway,
the old saying, I don't know if he ever actually said this, the emperor of Japan or a great general in Japan, with behind every blade of grass, why would we invade America? With behind every blade of grass is a rifle or is a firearm. And it's, when you think about that, and then you think of decentralization, behind every computer, behind every individual is a server that will take an immense amount of energy to go after.
Yep.
And then the centralized forces start thinking, what's the point? Just let them have what they have.
You want to end mass surveillance, unjustified, undignified mass surveillance? Make it hard to surveil.
That's right.
When you put all your stuff on iCloud and everyone puts all their stuff on iCloud, it costs
Sitting duck.
nothing. It's just a flick of a finger to surveil everyone at all times. But if everyone's running their own server, surveillance is effectively impossible. And surveillance is necessary for tyranny. So this is just as effective, if not more effective, than owning physical arms, is taking your presence out of the cloud and putting it on your own private cloud that you and you alone can access and use. It's a very effective way to not only protect yourself in this antagonistic environment, but if enough people do it, it is massive political power, right? Because political power is derived from physical force, which is arrived at or leveraged through technology. So we're using technology to gain political power, ultimately.
If the things that you're saying haven't made people think about what their next course of action is, what their call to action is, I don't know what will. And we've talked for a while. I want you to have a few minutes to talk about what the new things that you're doing at Start9, any new apps, any new developments that are coming out, and then we can close.
Great. We have a major new version of our operating system getting ready to launch. It's currently in testing. I don't have an exact due date, but it's coming soon. It is a huge improvement on our previous OS, and we've rewritten the OS a couple times now, each time improving upon the foundation rather than just building a taller and taller house on a unstable foundation. We have
Thank you.
continually kind of redone the foundation because we're trying to build something that can last for a long time and serve as the foundation of the sovereign computing future. So we have a new version coming out that totally reworks everything. It already works really well, but this is a huge improvement. And that's coming soon. Now, we also have new devices coming. So we currently sell plug and play servers, which you don't need to buy. Our operating system, which is what we actually build as a company, is a free piece of software, totally free. You can go to the internet and download it. You can even download the source code and compile it yourself if you really want to, and install it onto your computer. You could flash your old MacBook with it, your old Windows machine, a mini PC that you bought somewhere else, and be up and running with a server in short order and totally for free, minus the cost of the hardware, which of course you had to have bought or will need to buy because an operating system needs to run on a computer. So we sell computers, servers, in case you don't have that hardware already. We're happy to sell it, and we sell it at a very reasonable price, competitive with any other computer you would buy. We are coming out with a new device soon, which has not been formally announced yet, but I'm fine with leaking things here and there. We will be launching a router, announcing a router in the near future, and then launching it a few months thereafter. It's still early stages, but it is in the works already. Routers are very important devices. Just like a Bitcoin node is your gateway and access to the Bitcoin network. Well, the router is your gateway and access to the internet, upon which Bitcoin lives and everything else lives. So the internet is actually the backbone of the digital, future and information society. And so your router better be pretty good in terms of guaranteeing your access and orchestrating devices, right? The router's role in the computing paradigm is not only a gateway to the internet and firewall from the internet to prevent things from getting in that shouldn't come in, but it also orchestrates devices. It's the puppet master of all the devices in your home, which are getting more, not less, right? More and more smart devices. So we personally envision a future where everything is smart, where it's, watches and health bracelets and thermostats and doorbells and cars, and everything is a smart device connected to the internet, light bulbs and everything else. And we think this is great, so long as these devices are under your direct sovereign control on private networks that you and you alone can access. If all of these devices, which is currently the case, are all talking to Apple and Google servers, the whole dystopian nature of cloud computing gets nasty fast, because it's no longer just like, Apple can see my photos. It's like, Apple can literally lock my doors, turn up the heat,
Spoil the food in my refrigerator.
anything they want. I mean, your entire home becomes an attack vector against you. It's the opposite of what a home should be. So this is what's being built aggressively, by the way, by our enemy, is this invasion now into the physical world. And when you combine AI with this, it gets very scary. Okay. You start talking about smart devices that are internet connected and imbued with the intelligence of an artificial intelligence, would bring a whole new meaning to the word like lockdowns in a pandemic. I mean, you like literally wouldn't be able to leave your home physically and could be starved out, you could perform a genocide silently in a futuristic world where everyone had smart devices in their homes that were being governed by Apple, which itself is subject to the sovereign state. You could have a dictator emerge, democratically elected, that could push a few buttons and wipe out a segment of the population. Targeted, by the way, not carpet bombing, but you could literally target using social media profiling everyone who believes a certain thing and just gas their home using smart devices. I mean, I'm getting extreme here. And this is not immediately a threat because it's still very early in this progression, but you can imagine this future. And so we are aggressively trying to build the opposite of that future where you have smart devices, but they're being used for you and your defense as opposed to used against you and offense. And so the router, coming full circle here, is a necessary prerequisite to that future. So the server was the backbone. The server is like the brain of the operation. It's where all the data is stored and all the information through which all the information flows. The router is the access point and defense from the broader internet. And so that was a logical progression for us as a company to now build router software and sell router devices. And then once we have the server and the router, then we can start having a lot of fun. Then we can start working with, startup companies that are building health bracelets or watches or thermostats and want to compete with Nest and these like big IoT companies, but don't have a competitive advantage. Well, we can be their competitive advantage because we can say, look, the reason you're going to crush Nest at their own game and sell thermostats is because the thermostat you sell will automatically plug into this private network and be under the sole control of the user. And I talk about thermostats. That's not even a big one. The main one for us, we think there's two that we've identified as like the big products is cameras. Security cameras are huge. People want security cameras in and outside their home, but are afraid to put cameras in their home because they know that video footage is being directly fed to a Google server. But if I could put a security camera in my home and have the video footage be directly fed to my local server, then accessible to me and only me from anywhere in the world through the router and the server, live video streams of my home from the other side of the world, nobody even knows the camera exists. Literally, nobody knows the camera exists except for me, but I can watch the camera live from the other side of the world. That is the future that we are making possible like next year. Like we are very, very close to having this full paradigm built out such that a non-technical person can achieve that degree of security and privacy and affordably. None of this would be expensive either. So that's where we're going as a company. And the next step in that progression is a router. It needs to be a router. So it's in the works.
Absolutely mind-blowing. You're busy. You're busy, but you are busy building the future that all of us Bitcoiners dream about. All of us freedom and loving people dream about, but we don't necessarily know the steps there. We think, oh, we'll hold Bitcoin and like we're good. Oh, we're going to vote for the right guy. We're good. No, these are clear-cut steps in building out technology to protect our future, our family. And Matt Hill, I can't thank you enough. Matt Hill, CEO from Start9, visiting us for an hour. Check him out. Check his website out. Check his products out. Matt, it's an honor. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. I had a great talk. And yeah, I got back to work.
Oh, man.
I got a lot to do.
I know you do.
Really, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you. So again, this is episode 14. Matt was brilliant. And when you think about this, he described essentially what you go back and watch The Matrix and see if you can't see clear parallels with what he's describing. We are living essentially in the Matrix right now. And people like Matt, the company like Start9, Bitcoin, Lightning, all of these technologies, they are building up to save us essentially from this growing threat that's living and breathing right now. Tune in next week where we're going to find more brilliant thinkers, more brilliant minds in Bitcoin that are helping us pave a way for a sovereign, prosperous future. I'm Sir Ulrich, like my father before me. See you next time.